Hey, my lovelies. I hope you're all doing really well. As you might have noticed, I have slightly changed positions because I'm in Australia and today it is extremely hot. So this room is a little bit cooler, so I've just changed positions, but I've still got the books shelf behind me, so all good. So for today's video, we are going to be doing a overview and total overhaul of ACOTAR, the series. So if you're not familiar with what ACOTAR stands for, it is A Court of Thorns and Roses series, which is one of Sarah J Maas's. I know she has a few series that she's done. Let's get right into the video. So as you can see behind me, I have all of the books in this series. And I just wanted to start off the sort of likes, dislikes, what I thought about the books, all of that stuff with a little bit of a pet peeve. So as you can see, all of the books are here, but this one is huge. Yes, it's thick, but it's so tall and it doesn't line up perfectly with these ones, and it literally kills my soul. So I just thought I would mention that. Let me know down below in the comments if that is a pet peeve of yours, because it's a pet peeve of mine when it's a series and not all of the books are the same size. So as already mentioned, it's the A Court of Thorns and Roses series, and that is the title of the first book. So this is the first book. I love the colors of the books and how they're all sort of like a neon, or well, at least this one starts with a neon and they're all sort of different colors. I was a little disappointed, I'm not gonna lie, with the last one being sort of just gray and orange. It was a little bit less on theme with the rest of the series, but what can you do? Unfortunately, I'm not in control of what the covers look like. But yes, so this one is the intro book. Before I get into everything as well, I just wanted to say this is a bit of a deep dive into these books. So if you haven't actually read them yet, there are going to be spoilers. So please go onto one of my other videos, have a look at those, and maybe give this one a miss. Please watch it if you would love to. If you aren't as worried about spoilers, then that's okay. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that there will be a few spoilers because I'm just doing a bit of a deep dive into the series as it has been out for a little bit. One starts with Feyre, and she is basically the carer of her whole family. She is the one that goes and hunts and grabs food and does the best to make sure that they survive through every winter and all of those things. And basically in the start of the book, she ends up killing a wolf. And it turns out that that wolf is one of Tamlin, who Tamlin is a high fae in the magical realm. And the book that she killed was someone that he knew. So he comes back and is basically like a life for a life. So she ends up going with him into the magical realm and has to stay with him forever, basically. So that's sort of like the premise of it all. I guess not of it all, but the start of it. And I guess in a way, yes, it's definitely sort of like a Beauty and the Beast-esque situation. There's actually quite a few moments that correspond with the Beauty and the Beast movies, and especially there's also a curse put on them, which is all about they have to wear these masks and they're forced to wear the masks because of the curse, but they've been compelled not to tell anyone about how to break the curse. It just has to be broken by the person, and the way to break the curse is for someone to have killed a fae in cold blood and in hatred, and then fall in love with a fae afterwards. So go from one extreme to the other, basically. And that's kind of like a little bit of a like similar thing where it's like she has to fall in love with the beast even though he looks like a beast. So yeah, definitely a little bit Beauty and the Beastie, but it comes through with a different world, different creatures, all those things. I'd say this one is definitely a great first book. It covers so much in the one book, and it definitely hooked me in to continue reading for the rest of the series. There's a whole lot that goes on in terms of character development and watching Feyre and Tamlin go from sort of hating each other to loving each other and protecting each other. And then we also get to meet Rysand for the first time, and that's also really interesting because that adds another layer. And then once we get to hear about all of the Night Court things with Amarantha, it just keeps on adding layers and layers, and we're finding more and more out about this world that we've just been introduced to. And I think one of my favorite parts of the book was when they do the trials at the end, where Amarantha says that she can either do one trial a month, and if she completes all 3 trials, then she'll release everyone and Tamlin will be okay, because Amarantha ended up capturing Tamlin. Or she can solve the riddle and all of it stops and everyone gets released and everything's okay again. And I just think it's really interesting. It was a really interesting way to go about it. And I think also it was a really interesting way to set up the different trials. And there were so many twists that you didn't expect right at the end. And I just really, really enjoyed it. And I also love the way that they intertwined Rysand into the story and how he was making that bargain with her, that if he did this for her, that she would have to go to the Night Court to be with him for a certain amount of time every month, I believe it was. And that definitely tied in his character more and sort of introduced it. And in this first book, we really get a sense that Rysand we see a little bit of how he's sort of might have a little bit of a heart going on in there, but sort of led to believe that he's a little bit of a nasty guy and he's a little bit evil. And I think that's a little bit of a sort of misdirect because of what we find out happens in the rest of the novels. So yes, a great book to sort of hook you into the series, and yeah, it definitely hooked me into the series. So for the second book, we have A Court of Mist and Fury. And this one again is sort of that lovely fluoro color with the similar front cover and the illustration as well. I believe this one starts about 3 months after the end of the first book. And it sort of goes along the lines of Tamlin and Feyre are engaged now, but Feyre still has a lot of nightmares and she's sort of still traumatized by everything that happened under the mountain with Amarantha. And she is sort of just trying to figure out where she is in her own mind. And she's also trying to figure out where her position is within the court that she's about to basically rule over. But she's not going to rule over because Tamlin doesn't want her to become a high lady, and she's not going to become a high lady. So she doesn't really understand what her role is supposed to be within the court. She also doesn't understand why their mate connection hasn't happened yet. So basically within this world, in a way, it's kind of a little bit similar to Twilight in terms of like the whole connection thing with the wolves and things. But yeah, they have a mate who, once they find that connection, will happen, and they are supposed to be with that person for the rest of their life. Basically, it's like a mating bond that they have with another Fae. So she's like, she doesn't understand why that bond hasn't happened with Tamlin yet, and she's just sort of all over the place. So basically she gets to the wedding and she's a little bit freaked out. She's got a bit of cold feet and she's sort of screaming in her head, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I want to do this, blah, 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 blah. And so Rysand comes in and whisks her away from her wedding, which is a little bit of a shocking moment and also a pretty cool surprise. And then, yeah, so basically whisks her away and takes her to the Night Court and says, you need to learn how to read and you need to learn how to shield your mind because of the bond between the promise that they made each other. He can hear her thoughts and she can hear his, but because he can shield his own mind, she can't really hear his unless he allows her to. So she's still wary of him, and the Night Court isn't as scary as she thought it was going to be, because the Night Court is portrayed to everyone else as this horrible court that's the worst, and no, everyone only really knows about Under the Mountain, but there's a whole other area of the Night Court where he takes her and where he lives. And this is where we first meet Morrigan, which is one of Rysand's family / friends, who is part of his court. Throughout this novel, she ends up she goes to Tamlin, she goes to Rysand, she goes to Tamlin, she goes to Rysand. And I think it's this sort of tug of war between how they appreciate her and how they kind of don't appreciate her, I guess. I feel like Tamlin is very much, no, we don't want to foster the powers that she's getting, because in the last novel, which I don't think I mentioned, but it's big spoiler, but in the last book, she basically dies, and then all of the high fae of the courts give her a little bit of their power to then revive her. And then it turns out that she is now a high fae. She turns into a high fae instead of human, and then she ends up getting a little bit of every court's powers. So in this world, there's, I think, the autumn court, the winter court, the spring court, the summer court, and then there's the night court. I may have missed one, but I hope I didn't. But there's, yeah, a whole bunch of courts, and she sort of gets a little bit of each court's powers. And then, and the day court. I think there's also the day court as well. So he wants to not foster them. He doesn't think that she should be trained in her powers. It's kind of like he just wants her to be this wife of his, this little wife of his that doesn't really do much, doesn't really have much say. But then she goes to the night court, and Rysand is always open about everything. He tells her everything. He wants her to train. He wants her to be able to shield herself. He wants her to be able to use her powers. He wants her to do what she wants to do and be strong and basically nurture her. Because whenever she goes to Tamlin's, she ends up being an emotional wreck and not eating. But when she's at Rysand's, she's starting to blossom. So you can kind of see a little bit of how it's like Tamlin is pushing her away with the way that he is treating her. In this book, we also get introduced to some amazing new characters, which are his Rysand's inner circle of friends at the night court. So that also includes, so there was Morrigan, and then that includes Cassian, Azriel, and Amren as well. And Cassian and Azriel are two Illyrian warriors, and Morrigan is, I believe, also a high fae. I believe she is the daughter of the king of the night court, if I'm not mistaken. And I believe Amren is also a sort of mystical creature that's been around for like centuries, and she was expelled for some reason to their realm. So yes, that is them, and it's so interesting to have all these extra characters and all these extra dynamics being thrown in, and it's all really great, and we get to see them evolve, which is also really nice as well. There's also basically a big story around this cauldron that can bring the wall down between the human world and the fae world, and there's all of these sort of separate people who really want the wall to be down and to use the cauldron to bring the wall down, but Feyre and Rysand and all of those courts, they don't want that to happen, because then people will be able to get to the human courts and bring it back centuries ago to when humans were basically slaves for the Fae, and that's not what they want in the world anymore. So there's this cauldron, and they need to find two halves of this book to be able to put it back together to hopefully nullify the cauldron so that that can't happen. I feel like this book is definitely where Feyre finds out a lot more about everything happening within the courts, because Rysand is so forthcoming with her. And throughout this, we find out that Rysand and Feyre are actually mates, and that Rysand actually knew about that, but because he wanted her to feel it and know it herself before actually telling her, or so that she wasn't sort of forced into anything that she didn't want to be forced into. Feyre is starting to sort of come into her own. We do get the magical moment of Rhys and Feyre actually coming together as mates, which is beautiful. I love Rhys. Rhys is one of my favorite characters. He is just magnificent, and yes, I love him. I also love all of his inner circle friends as well. And I sort of at the end, we get that sort of horrible moment where they try to nullify the cauldron, and it completely goes absolutely horribly wrong. And her sisters get trapped, her human sisters, and Azriel gets really, really, really injured, and all of that happens. She finds out as well that Tamlin ended up betraying her as well. And then, yeah, we also find out Lucian ends up being one of her sister's mates, and yeah, it's literally this whole video is just spoilers. I'm so well, I warned you, but yes, apologies again, but these books have been out for a little bit, and as I said, it's a deep dive. So yes, I loved sort of all of the endings. I do feel like quite often with these novels, there's not that much. I guess there's a little bit going on throughout the middle of the books, but then a lot of stuff happens right at the end. You sort of have to get through the whole book to get to the juicy stuff. I guess there's some juicy stuff throughout, but then you get right to the end and like everything happens, which is a little bit, for me, I feel like not the best writing style in my opinion. It makes it harder for me to get through the book and it takes a lot longer for me. But yes, so that is that one. I love that one as well. I definitely flew through both of these, the first one and the second one. So yeah, definitely worth the read. So for the third book of the series, it is A Court of Wings and Ruin. I will admit, this one, I started to read it a couple of years ago, and then I got somewhat in and just fell out of it. And then it was probably this year that I got back into all the books and actually read the last 3. I just feel like, as much as this one is great, and I feel like, again, the ending is really great, I just feel like it is a little bit of a slow trundle through the book just to get to the good stuff, I feel like, with this one. I think, yes, it's really good and there are some great things, which I will mention soon, but yes, I just think it took me a little bit to get through it. It's a thick boy as well. It's not the thickest. I think the last book is the thickest, or at least they're sort of a similar thickness, but I believe the last book is the thickest, but it's the second thickest out of the whole series. So basically this one, we get to see a lot more about Feyre's family. So her sisters come into it, where they've both been in the cauldron and come out as Fays with powers, which we get to see a lot more about Nesta, who is this strong-willed, independent woman who has neither of the sisters ever wanted to be Fae. They always wanted to be human, and humans have always had this ingrained sort of disgust or hatred for Fays. So now they're Fays and they're trying to wrap their heads around it and understand it and not hate themselves and understand what's happening, and it's just all a little bit overwhelming. And we get to see the relationship between Elaine and Nesta and Feyre, all the 3 sisters, and how Elaine sort of is in denial all of the time. She's this gentle, beautiful girl who just doesn't understand that she can't marry her fiance who is human, and who's back in the human realm, and she's just trying to reconcile herself with that, and she's just in this denial and this depressive state where she doesn't understand and she doesn't know who she is anymore. And Nesta is basically similar, but Nesta is trying to protect Elaine, and there's all this fighting between Feyre and Nesta and Elaine, and I think that's really interesting to sort of delve more into her family. And then we also get to hear a little bit more about Tamlin and Lucien. Tamlin's sort of in this angry hole, and he doesn't realize that Feyre doesn't love him and doesn't want to be part of his court, but she's just doing what she has to do until she can get back to Rhys and back to her friends in the Night Court. And he's basically just getting worse and worse and worse, more angry, more intolerable, and yeah, basically he brings about his own ruin. Yes, Feyre brings her ruin to him as well, but he also brings about his own ruin. He's just horrible. And then we also find out a little bit more about Lucien, because Lucien comes into it as he finds out that he's Elaine's mate, but Elaine wants nothing to do with it. She doesn't want to be with a Fae, but Lucien is encapsulated with her, and it's sort of like an unrequited love, and it's a really interesting story. And we also get to find out a little bit more about Lucien and his brothers and the Autumn Court as well. Feyre also had, for some reason, I don't know why, I actually really loved the Surreal as a character, even though he was supposed to be this gross sort of monster. Feyre, I just feel like, had ended up with this connection with him because she went to him again to find out more information about what was happening with everything going on within the courts, because again, they're still trying to stop this wall from coming down, stop Highburn from bringing the wall down. And I just think there's just this sort of weirdly tender moment where he ends up getting shot and he's about to die, and they have this little connection. And I just kind of loved that moment where she had with the cereal, because he helped her on her journey a lot, and he was sort of this weird character that came in and out, but was definitely there for most of her journey. Also, at one point, even though we know that Feyre sort of hates Tamlin at this point and is just disgusted in him because he gave them up to Highburn, at one point, Elaine has been captured, so Feyre goes into the Highburn camp to grab her and bring her home. And she can't make it out. She's trying to use her wings that she now has, but she hasn't really had many lessons. She had some lessons, but not enough to really know what she's doing. She does end up making it, but only because Tamlin comes in and comes into his sort of beast mode, because he can morph into animals, and sort of destroys everyone and gets her to escape. And it sort of shows that, like, even though Tamlin is angry and has all this hatred, he still loves her and he would still do a lot of things for her. I also really love the addition of the Bone Carver and Briaxis. I really loved all of these extra magical creatures that added this really cool mystical element to all of the stories. I thought they were really great. And I also loved so much that they ended up teaming up with Feyre and the rest of them and making their mark in the war between Highburn and the rest of the High Courts. I loved the end of this story. Like, it was all, as much as, yes, it's a little bit of a hog to get to it, once I got to the start of the war and like the start of all the juicy stuff, it was just, I absolutely rushed through it because there was so much going on. There's so many amazing moments within the war, there's sadness, there's happiness, there's tragic moments, and it's just brilliant. I do really love the end of this novel. Sort of halfway through, I think it starts to pick up. I just think you really kind of have to just sort of get through that start bit to get to the really juicy stuff. But yes, I did really like this book. I feel like it was definitely one of my faves. I think maybe the second book was a little bit more of a fave for me, but I think this one comes in second place in terms of the whole series, just because it did take me that little bit longer to get into, but I did really love it once I got into it, because you got to find out a lot more about all of the characters and what their journeys were, and you got to fall in love with them right before potentially tragic things happened to them. So it was sort of falling in love and then gut-wrenching, and yeah, so it was really good. One last comment about this book though, it was wrapped up nicely, but I do feel like sometimes books, they wrap up too nicely. Like, I know that sounds horrible. Obviously everyone's after, not everyone, but most people are after sort of a happy ending and everything is all good in the end. But I just feel like it was sort of this moment of like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. And then it was fixed again right away. And I just feel like, I don't know, I guess when I think about stories, like I guess in Game of Thrones, where people die and they die and you're just like in shock and you're like, oh my God, what are they coming back? And it's like, no, they're not coming back. They're just dead. I don't know. I think, yes, it was wrapped up nicely and it was a happy ending and all that stuff. Well, obviously there was a little bit of tragedy in it, but I just feel like, yeah, it could have been a little more less nicely wrapped up, I guess, if that makes any sense. I hope it makes sense. But yes, that's sort of my thoughts about the end of that book. Oh boy, so A Court of Frost and Starlight. Where do I even begin? Honestly, I don't really think I have much to say about this book. It is the fourth book in the series. It is tiny. It's the smallest book of them all. And if I'm completely honest, and I feel like other people would agree with me on this, but I feel like this book was really unnecessary. I feel like this book definitely didn't need to be in the series at all. I feel like it really didn't add that much to the story. It's basically just this novel about everyone being in the Night Court and Feyre and Rysand and all of his inner circle friends. So Morrigan, Amren, Cassian and Azriel, and even Nesta and Elaine as well. Feyre's sisters, just sort of having this Christmas event, which it wasn't Christmas. I can't exactly remember right now what it was called, but it's basically a kind of Christmas, but within the Night Court realm, within Valaris, which is where they are. It just was a little bit of like a filler book. I feel like, I don't know whether maybe she just wanted to write this so then she had more time to finish the last one, which is a really, really, really big book. But it set up the last book a little bit with the relationship between Nesta and Cassian, but as I said, I don't have too much to say about this book. I do really feel like it didn't really need to be in the series. As I said, it just felt like a little bit of a filler book before beginning the really big hog that is the last book. So yeah, that's really all I have to say about this one. Let's get on to the last book. So for the last book, we have A Court of Silver Flames, which, as I said, it's a little bit more, it's a grey book, and grey and orange. And I guess in terms of the characters that are the main characters within this novel, it sort of goes with their sort of flame aesthetic. I was a little bit disappointed that it didn't sort of go with the flow of the other books. And yes, as I mentioned, that it was not the same size and it didn't fit with the series. But I digress. This novel was an absolute hog to get through. It was so long. It was so long. I believe it's around 750 pages. So it's a good book. It is a hefty one. It is a thick boy. And it follows Nesta and Cassian's relationship. So instead of Feyre and Rysand, and especially just Feyre in general being the main character of the stories and it coming from her, it's basically Nesta who is the main character of the story, and it's from her perspective more so than it is anyone else's. It's a little bit from Cassian's perspective. I believe it switches between the two of them, but it is about their relationship, and it's about Nesta dealing with coming into terms with her powers and coming into terms with who she is and her relationships with people and all of those things. I also felt for this book it was a bit repetitive. I do feel like we were taking one step forward and about 5 steps back. I feel like Nesta's development throughout it, I know she was going through a lot of trauma and all of those things, and I understand that can take a really, really long time to get through trauma and things like that. But I just feel like for this book, it just became extremely repetitive, where she came a little bit closer to Cassian, but then she pulled back tenfold when one thing happened, and you were just sort of like, oh my God, we get it, love-hate thing, but also give me the love, you know? There were definitely aspects that I loved about this book, as I probably wouldn't have finished it if it wasn't, but I did really want to finish it, obviously, because I wanted to finish the series. I don't know if Sarah J. Maas is bringing out another book for this series, but I did want to get through the last book so far. I loved the connection with Cassian. I feel like her connection with Cassian was really beautiful, and he was always there for her no matter what she did, even if she did some really bad things. She never really did things that were too bad, but she did push him away, but he never ever left her side, even when she was pushing him away, because he loved her and he would do anything for her. And I love Cassian's character for really being there for her that whole time and always being that stronghold that she really, really needed, even when she didn't think that she needed it. So yeah, I definitely fell in love with Cassian throughout this novel. He was really a grounding person for her throughout the story. I also love the connection that she made with her two friends. So throughout the books, she finds this priestess that she becomes really good friends with, Gwyn, who all the priestesses have gone through the really traumatic experiences, and Rysand gives them the library for them to be able to just stay away from anything that won't trigger them or bring back their trauma and let them recover. And Gwyn is one of those. And through this, Nesta decides to make this sort of gang of girls who are gonna learn how to protect themselves against others and protect themselves against their fears and things like that. And they learn to fight, and they want to be like the Valkyries. So the Valkyries were this legion of fighting women who were absolutely amazing. So basically there's the Illyrians, which are all male, and they don't really allow women to be Illyrian soldiers. And they even clip their wings, and that is basically where Emery comes in, which is the other sort of girl in this trio that becomes Nesta's friends. And she ends up finding out that Emery had her wings clipped, and that's sort of a common thing there because they don't want them to be able to fly or learn how to be soldiers. So Nesta decides that she wants Cassian and Azriel to teach them all how to fight and how to be Valkyries, because they really want to be Valkyries. So they have to go through these trials to become Valkyries and cut this ribbon with a sword. And through this, Gwyn, you find out about her and her trauma, and she really comes out of her shell, and you love to see the friendship between Emery and all of them as well. I really loved that friendship and that whole sisterly bond, and obviously the badass woman gang that they created as well. I also think too, there's this theme within A Court of Silver Flames, where Nesta is up in this high tower and she has to run down these stairs. I can't remember exactly how many stairs there are, but it's like a really, really, really big amount. And she keeps trying to run down these stairs, but every time she only gets to a certain point and she can't go anymore and she has to run back up and go back up. And basically, at the start of it, Cassian said, if you can make it down all of those stairs, you are allowed to go into town, you're allowed to do whatever you want, but I doubt that you'll be able to make it. And at first, before everything happened, she was going to pubs all the time. She was really drunk. She was doing nothing. She was doing a whole bunch of other stuff. She was just in a really bad place. And so she was obviously, at times, she was just trying to get down there so that she could run away from her problems. And I think at times she got further than she thought she would get, and at times she didn't get as far as she would get. I think that was a really nice visual of her progress and where she was going, because when in the story, when she was backtracking a little bit, she could not make it down those stairs as far as she wanted to. And then when she was actually growing and getting a little bit further and things were getting better, she could get down those stairs a little bit more. So I feel like it was this nice visual of showing her progress without actually saying that she was progressing. So for this book, my favorite part was when the three girls end up doing this trial that they're not supposed to be doing. So the trial is only for Illyrian soldiers, male Illyrian soldiers, and they dump them in there. And basically it's kind of like a Hunger Games moment where you have to kill everyone else to get to the top, and you have to touch this stone. And if you touch this stone, you become a warrior, an official warrior. And they're not supposed to be in it, but the Illyrian soldiers end up kidnapping them and dropping them in there because they believe that they won't be able to survive. And it's like a penance because they don't think that females should be fighting and learning how to fight and be soldiers. So basically throughout all of that, they find each other and they end up getting to the end. And yeah, I just really love that moment of sort of friendship and sisterhood, and it was really, really cool. And they were just sort of like fighting their way through, and it was really awesome. So I really loved that bit. But yeah, this one, as I said, it was a long time for me to finish this novel. And again, it's very, there's a high, and then it goes back and there's not much happening, and then there's a high and there's not much happening, and then a whole crap ton of stuff happens right at the end. So yeah, it's definitely a theme, I think, within Sarah J. Maas's writing, that she sort of have these ebbs and flows, which you sort of just have to get used to. So you're probably wondering as well why I haven't mentioned the sexy moments in the stories. Well, I wanted to have a whole section for this, as it's a massive part of the novels, and I just feel like it deserves a little bit of a side note on its own. So I feel like throughout the book, yes, it's like a little bit smutty, it's a little bit sexy. There's definitely scenes between all of the love interests that are quite intense. I don't really know what the genre of the novels are, if they're like YA or if they're something like that. I feel like if they're YA, maybe it's a little bit too of a risque book for YA, I don't know, but there is very intense, very in-depth sort of sex scenes and things like that. So definitely keep that in mind, I guess, if someone younger is going to read it or things like that. But yeah, those are in there, and I loved it. They were basically just like crazy and wild and like animalistic sometimes, and yeah, it was just crazy. And especially in the last book, A Court of Silver Flames, Cassian and Nesta absolutely went for it. Like Sarah J. Maas absolutely upped the ante with the sexy scenes when it came to Cassian and Nesta. Like, she was not holding back. So that is definitely something that I guess you can look forward to, I guess, if you like that part of the stories and things like that for the last book. But yeah, she definitely upped the ante for that, even though like it is throughout all of the books, as I said, upped the ante in the last book. I think some people thought that for the last book it was a little bit too much, but I feel like in a way for a lot of the book they were holding themselves back from each other, and they were trying to sort of figure out themselves before they let someone else in. And I feel like when they actually did get that moment together, they just absolutely went for it. And I think that actually really worked for them, because that was their story. They were really holding themselves back from each other, and they finally got this moment to be together, and they just absolutely went for it. So I do feel like that fitted with the story, but obviously everyone else has their own opinions. I would love to hear your opinions about those things. Please comment down below and like the video. So for the last section of this video, I just wanted to go over a little bit of my favorite characters for this series. As there's quite a few characters in the series, I thought I would go over a couple that I really like, which are a few more than probably most of them really. I really do. There's a lot of good things about each character individually. So to start off, I loved Reese. He was cool and suave and sexy and cheeky and sarcastic and amazing, and he let Feyre be by his side, be his high lady, be his partner in crime, just be everything. He told her everything. They really were truly mates, and they were together as a unit. And I think that was really great, the way he treated her and the way that he loved her. Cassian is just, oh my God, he's this loving, all protecting soldier that would literally do anything for everyone. He has an absolute heart of gold, and he's just beautiful. I feel like when it comes to choosing between Rysand and Cassian, it's so hard, because it's like Rysand is this dark, brooding, beautiful, protective person, and then Cassian is this always loving, always protecting, always open, funny, loving character. And it's just, they're both amazing. I would absolutely love it, as a side note, if there was a book about Asriel and Elaine, because you start to see in this last book, and even within that sort of mini book a little bit, about Asriel and Elaine sort of having a connection with each other. And I feel like they would actually be really great for each other, because Asriel has this dark side to him, the shadows that he has, and Elaine is just this beautiful sort of dainty, pretty, lovely girl who just tends to her garden, and she's so gentle and sweet to literally everyone. And I feel like that is really symbiotic with each other. I feel like that would really work if they were with each other, but I also would love to see their relationship. I feel like Sarah J Maas might have to pare back the sexiness a little bit with it. I feel like obviously you can put it in, but I just feel like with those two characters, I feel like their relationship would be really tender with each other, and it would be really, really loving and less sort of animalistic than the others. I feel like it would be a really interesting novel for her to do. So Sarah J Maas, please provide the goods, is basically what I'm saying. Morrigan is basically just this amazing, always strong, always just independent, really beautiful girl who just, well, woman who just, I would love her to finally find love. I would love her to finally just let Asriel go and let him be with who he wants to be with, and be with her woman, find her woman, and find someone that she really loves, and just let herself be happy. I think that would be really great. And last but certainly not least, I love Amren. She was absolutely iconic. She was strong, she was fierce, she was just this absolutely hard character, but you knew deep within she would do absolutely anything for any of her friends if they needed it. And she was just so sarcastic and funny and witty, and she was a really good character. I really loved her, even though I guess she doesn't really have, she has a little bit, like you get to find out a little bit more about her and stuff, but she doesn't really have too much. I just feel like she was a really cool character to be part of that friendship circle. So overall, I guess with this series, it's an easy read. It's not something you go into expecting to come out worrying about some existential crisis or having completely to think about really deeply into things and all of that. It's an easy read. It's sexy and it's funny and it's heartbreaking and it's fun and there's a lot of action, and yeah, it's just a really nice read, especially if maybe you were reading something that was a bit heavy before and you just wanted something that's a little bit easier, it's a little bit of a break. Definitely something you could pick up and go for. And I guess basically that's kind of it for me on the ACOTAR series. I hope you really enjoyed this video. I really enjoyed making it and having a bit more of a deep dive back into the series after having read it. I had all of these moments of like, oh my God, that happened in this book and that happened in this book and this happened in this book. And yeah, it was really cool for me. So I hope you really enjoyed it. And so with that, that is the end of the video. I hope if you did really enjoy it, you can like and subscribe for my YouTube channel. I also hope if you could please in the comments let me know which one was your favorite of the series, or if you have read it, if you haven't read it, let me know. I would love to interact with you guys and actually see where your thoughts are on the ACOTAR series and what you thought of it. So with that, goodbye for now, but not forever, my beautiful bookworms. See ya!